It's great to be here tonight. Thanks. I worked for home health and hospices for 20 years, and I kept getting tired, more and more tired. I was dragging. I couldn't figure out what was going on. But you know, you go to someone who's dying, and suddenly your pain doesn't seem so bad. And I kept, plugging on, and then I came to found out that I had a condition called endometriosis, which I knew nothing about. But by the time I was 40, and so I had these big tumors growing inside of me, and just before I went to the doctor to find out what, could they please somehow make my life easier, the pain specialist said it was psychosomatic and I needed a psychiatrist. And I thought I would go to one in a heartbeat, but I'm going to tell him my legs hurt? Like, it just didn't quite add up. So I had the beautiful experience of being a so-called professional in the industry, then having a mysterious condition, and I went to I think it was 8 or 9 specialists, and then now having to live with it. And it's amazing how it doesn't matter how much you know or how much you can help someone else. When you're the person with the chronic condition, boy, it throws you for a loop. And so it humbled me right down to my knees. So I'm delighted now to be in private practice helping other people and just walking on that journey with people. I definitely don't have the answers all the time, but I can at least help you figure out kind of what's wrong. How many of you remember Maslow and his hierarchy of needs? A few hands. Well, in Psych 101, we're all kind of taught about this guy named Maslow. And he is sort of single-handedly responsible for changing pathology-based psychotherapy and like what's wrong with a person to instead thinking about what's right with a person. And what resources does this person have and how can we garner them together? So he's famous for something called the hierarchy of needs. And he says that, I'm going to oversimplify a little bit. He says that on the bottom, we all need basic biological needs, or our physiology, or what we'd kind of think of as like food, clothing, and shelter. So, what we're realizing, though, is he actually said a lot more than that. He talked about things like health and your body. Well, if you're in pain, that means you've got a problem way down, right? Then he talked about moving up to, he called it love and belonging. Well, if anyone has ever been in chronic pain, I take it, is everyone either in chronic pain or knows someone in chronic pain? Or I heard someone saying they were preparing for their chronic pain, which that's a real overachiever. But basically, we all at some point have been there and maybe don't necessarily want to go back. So we go to level 2, love and belonging. Level 3, I'll just put it up there while we talk about it, is the fancy word, he called it self-actualization. And another word for that is kind of like, I'd call it like a higher purpose. And so what he said is, and this is Maslow, he said, you can't sit a homeless person down and talk about what they want to do with their life if they don't even have food, clothing, and shelter. Well, I've noticed you can't really talk to me about what I want to cook for dinner when I'm in pain. When you look at kind of what's right and what's wrong, when you think about love and belonging, when you're in chronic pain, do you feel lovable? You do. All right. I've been told, I don't think, my teenagers say I'm not very lovable when I'm in pain. Do I belong to anyone when I'm in pain? You're my favorite person. I would love you as a neighbor. I got one visit in the hospital, and that was it. People say things like, "Oh, you had your surgery, right? You're better, right?" And what answer do they want to hear? "Oh, yeah, I'm fine. Thanks for asking." They don't want to hear about your last bowel movement and how your knees hurt now and your feet hurt and, well, I'm waiting on this, that, or the other, right? Or at least not my friends. So I got courtesy visits, but then they moved on with their lives. And I don't blame them because, everyone's life is busy. 40-year-old woman, people are busy, But I've heard, though, it doesn't necessarily change depending on how old you are. So your sense of belonging starts to get broken. You may not feel love. I'm in a support group with a lot of women who have been in pain, I think probably a lot longer than I have. And I've noticed a lot of them are single. Claudia, what did you say that your mother said the other day? You said something that cracked me up to put you on the spot. What did you say? It was something about what your mother used to say about sick women. Right. I was going to say she's off the auction block. But yeah, basically, right. Yeah, I'm not holding up my end of the bargain right now, in other words. Now, higher purpose, well, sometimes when you're in pain, your higher purpose is just to get to a doctor's appointment that day, maybe, just to get a few chores done. So you can see how the father of modern psychology, which is resource and rich and non-pathology based, in other words, strength based. We're all good. We all have all these things going for us. Even his model doesn't really hold up when you're looking at chronic pain. Or rather, it holds up, but we fall off. I think if I wrote my memoir, it would be middle class woman falls off Maslow's ladder. So my purpose is that, as I think about this and as I work with myself and my clients, my thinking is constantly, how can we outsmart the deficits that we find when we're in pain? How can we do more to feel love? How can we do more to feel, a sense of belonging? How can we do more to have a higher purpose and feel a sense of purpose even though we're in pain? Or our life has changed because of it. So I started using another model I was taught, and that is looking at pain from a body, mind, and social support method. So again, in school, I was trained to, everyone I meet, in terms of a client, I was trained you can assess them based on their biology, their psychology, and how they are in terms of their social functioning. And again, I thought, wow, when you look at chronic pain, all three of those start to go haywire. So the biology part can obviously be obvious, though depending on what your problem is, it can actually be more complicated than others, right? Ways that your biology can be altered. For instance, if you have Lyme disease, I spoke to the Lyme disease group and they talked to me about this thing they call brain fog. And because it's a neurological disease, a lot of people with Lyme disease can, in later stages, can report having cognitive problems. If you take a lot of medication, that can, of course, affect your biology. Sometimes pain and depression can travel the same pathways, and so people can feel depressed when in reality their nerves are actually telling them they have pain. Other ways your biology can be affected is it can affect your appetite, your sex drive, fatigue, muscle tension, sleep problems, mental clarity. Now, my purpose isn't to make a long laundry list of all the things that are wrong with our biology, but what I tell myself and what I tell my clients is when we can identify what's wrong, it gives us a place to figure out how we can make an intervention or make it right. So I borrow from the Avenue to Wellness healthier living series, and that is called the Symptom Cycle and the Self-Management Toolbox. So I have blank ones for you guys, and what I invite you to do is to look at them, and we'll go over them in a second, but you can actually fill them in for yourself, because I think that that's where they make sense, is when you make them more personal. So let's go through, for instance, just sticking with the biology. Assuming I don't want to take medications, or the medications I take, there's limitations to, because let's pretend this is my symptom cycle. So I tend to get tired, which makes me have poor sleep. I take long naps during the day, then I'm up all night. My pain feels increased because I'm tired and cranky. I get depressed because I'm tired and cranky. If I take medication, the forgetfulness gets worse. So you can see how it's called a symptom cycle, when you each person's problems can go round and round. And depending on whether your problem might be, like if you have a lung disease like emphysema or COPD, that might cause a set of problems that might be very different than mine, but it also might have a lot in common. So once I see my biological problem kind of like this, I'm able to say, hey, how could I get my sleep better? And then I think, okay, well, there's all this research now on how we don't want to use our iPads at night because it can keep us up. Turn off the TV, limit caffeine, etc. Right? So that's just one example of a way to improve a biological symptom without taking a sleeping pill, for instance, or without adding another pill to your box of pills like I have. The main idea behind a symptom cycle is for all of us to understand that nothing happens in isolation, even when it's something as something I used to think of as set in stone, like biology. That each thing can make, for instance, like being depressed, can make my perception of my fatigue worse, or it can make my pain worse. When I'm in pain, I tend to feel lonely, and I'm saying I, but this could be anybody. When I'm in pain, I tend to be more stressed out and anxious, which then leads me to think, boy, I've got a lot of difficult emotions. When you're tired, it can actually lead to poor sleep, which is sort of counterintuitive to me sometimes. So I brought symptom cycles with blank spots so that you could fill these out for yourselves, so that you could sort of looking at each of your own problems, like the way I'm kind of dissecting my imaginary set of problems right here, to see how you can get a handle on the biological part of your condition. Along those same lines is what's called our Self-Management Toolbox. I probably don't need to remind you or let you know. Most of us are very well aware of the dangers of prescription medication and how, before you know it, you can have a shoebox full of them. And then you have no idea what causes what, and who you were before, during, or after, before your diagnosis. And this is again borrowed from the Healthier Living workshop. I'm giving you a semi-blank one so that you can add to it for yourself to make it more personal. But it's figuring out what else can I do when I'm in pain? What else can I reach for besides, a Vicodin or a Percocet or whatever it is that is your go-to. So something that I'm finding that things like exercise, as counterintuitive as it is, and as hard as it is when you don't feel well to actually get up and walk. I know I still think that, exercise is like back in the Jane Fonda days, but I have to embrace that walking and stretching and yoga and all of those things that are, non-invasive, and I'm not running marathons with my kids, but it makes a huge difference. Problem solving. Medications can be helpful. Again, I know in Ukiah it's a big deal right now because a lot of the physicians aren't prescribing pain medication at all. Opiates. They'll prescribe lots of other medications that help, but a lot of people are really up in arms because they've gotten used to that, and so they have to think outside of their comfort zone for, what works. And they have very different effects on different people. Breathing techniques. I asked about 7 of my favorite colleagues that work a lot with people with chronic pain, and every single one of them, when I asked them what were the 3 things they would want to make sure anyone with chronic pain knew, every single one of them wrote breathing. My one friend who's a Harvard-trained, he's in his 30s, right out of Harvard, he's an anesthesiologist and a pain specialist. He said meditation, number 2 was breathing, and number 3 was exercise. And that's his, it's what he sees every single day. So for each one of us, this would be different. I gave you a blank one so that you could kind of, as you think about how to personalize this talk, you could put some things down that might help you out in moments of, I'd say, like the psychological despair of chronic pain, which, again, I thought, working around people that were dying for 20 years, I thought I would have known a little bit more about it, but it turns out I didn't. Being in pain is horrible, especially when you're never sure when it's going to come again. It's unpredictable. And that can leave you feeling frustrated. You can feel like you're having a constant fight, either for information, for a diagnosis. I said, I think about 10 years looking for a diagnosis. You can be fighting for medication. You can be fighting for insurance. You can be just trying to understand your symptom cycle. Until I saw that symptom cycle, when I took the Healthy Living class about 3 years ago, I never really realized that those things were cyclical. Like I sort of thought they happened like, well, this happens and then this happens. I didn't realize that they really fed on each other. And once I saw that pattern, it actually relieved a lot of my frustration because I was always trying to understand what was going on. Like, well, what did I do today? Why don't I have pain today? How come I had pain yesterday? I found I could really drive myself crazy trying to figure it out. The other thing psychologically that chronic pain really, I found plays into hard is that you tend to lose activities that once gave you pleasure. Some of that can sometimes be a sign of depression, but some of it is you just don't feel well, and so you don't have the same urge to do things that you once did, either because you physically can't do it or just because you just don't have everyone's shaking their head. What's the word I'm looking for? Energy. Okay. I found that when I was taking pain medication, it actually changed like the part of my brain that was creative. So my hobby's photography, and I didn't know how, and I still don't know why, but I swear it changed my ability to take a good picture. Sometimes the other really, these are 3 very poorly drawn circles. Sorry. I drew them just to show how they all play off each other and they all interact. What I found, again, and I hear, is that sometimes you lose your job if you can't keep up with what you've done. So now you've lost your security, your way of paying your bills. You might, before the Affordable Care Act, you might have lost your health insurance. You might lose hope. I for sure couldn't wrap my mind around my change in identity. I had identified myself as like a worker bee and as a type A person, as a social butterfly. You know, I was a mental health volunteer for Red Cross, going to different disasters around the country, and suddenly I couldn't get to like a doctor's appointment on time. So for sure, it was hard for me to wrap my mind around this new person that couldn't really function. I had a really hard time realizing that I wasn't being a very good parent. I was exhausted. In my support group, a lot of women with endometriosis can't get pregnant. And I want to tell them sometimes, you're lucky you can't, because I have 2 kids that I can't take care of. They don't want to hear that, and of course my kids would never want to hear that, so they better not be watching. But I don't feel like the same friend I used to be. You can't always do what you used to be able to do. Spouse or a partner. What was, Claudia again, what did your mother say? A sick woman doesn't make a good marriage material. Right. It's not always 50-50 when you're with someone who has chronic pain. There's a lot of guilt involved. I'm not being good enough. Maybe I'm not being a good enough mother, spouse, partner, worker, friend. Sometimes there's a lot of why me or why not me. You know, if you feel angry or resentful, but then when I look at my life, I think, well, shoot, I'm still alive. I might have a little chronic pain, but, you know, I met a lot of people in 20 years that aren't with me anymore that would probably trade chronic pain for their life, right? Right? So that sometimes helps me, but it also makes me feel guilty when I've spent a little time feeling sorry for myself. You can again see where, just like I talked about with biology, where there's places to make interventions biologically to change the way you're feeling biologically. There's the same kind of thing in terms of psychology. Number one is as my son said to me, Mom, get used to your new normal. And, you know, granted, it's always easier for someone else to say that to you, but he's right. I find surrounding myself with people who have it worse off than me helps a ton. And I don't mean that like, hi, you're my new best friend, because you obviously have it worse than me. Not like that. But I mean, in terms of getting out there in the world, fighting the desire to be isolated, and getting out there and seeing that actually it's really not that bad. And remarkably, when I'm out there thinking it's not that bad, I'm now not thinking about how much my legs hurt. So it's like this, you know, now if that jerk doctor who had told me it was psychological told me that, I wouldn't believe him and I'd be offended. But he's right in that sense, that the pain does, as they say in the Healthier Living workshop, your mind can only think of one thing at once. And if you're focusing on pain, that's all your mind can focus on. If you force yourself to get busy, whatever busy looks like to you, it can really can really help. Now, the last part of my the way I help people separate their understanding of their own chronic pain is by looking at how it affects you socially. Clearly, if you're in bed, unless you live on a commune, most of us then are isolated just by definition. And like I said, I got one set of visitors, 4 years ago, and then they moved on because, well, you had your surgery, you're fine now, right? And, they bring a casserole and then they don't even come back to get the dish because they hurt enough. So you can have, it's very easy to lose your support system. whether it was your job where you got your support system, if you're still not able to work, whether it's your gym, whether it's your friends, whether it's your family. But sometimes when you're in chronic pain, it's easy to not feel like you're holding up your end of the bargain, if anyone knows what I mean by that. So even though your friends and family might not think that, I tend to feel that way. Like I tend to think, I don't want to have a dinner party because I don't want to cook. But, you have to get creative so that you don't totally isolate yourself and isolate yourself from all the people that give your life meaning and that remind you why they love you. So another part of why our social functioning can decline is that we often have trouble keeping up with social commitments for another reason, and that's because sometimes chronic pain is unpredictable. After long enough, you almost just start to plan that you're in pain. Does anyone else do that? For a couple years, I would say yes to things, and then I had to cancel at the last minute, and that got so old, and people thought I was a flake, that I finally just started saying no to everything. And then it was like, look, if I surprise you, great. But it's hard sometimes to socialize if you don't feel like the same you. For me, I used to have a lot of energy, and I thought of myself as, I like to go out a lot. I like to go out in the evenings. Well, now, boy, after work, I'm pooped. No way. So I don't feel comfortable yet with myself to just sit at a table and let other people do the talking and entertaining. It still doesn't quite feel comfortable yet. I'm a work in progress. But I hear that from a lot of people. They don't feel like the same person. Another reason why socially it can feel uncomfortable is that people in your support system, they don't understand. Or, sometimes worse, is they think they understand. Because maybe you have cancer and they know someone that had cancer. Or they have cancer and you had cancer, so therefore your two cancers are alike. Or they went to someone and they got better. Or they know this great Chinese doctor that can make you a tea. Or whatever it might be. They're not really listening to you or what you're going through. They're kind of prescribing what their course of action is or should be. Sometimes it's hard to keep social support because, quite frankly, sometimes when we're in pain, we're angry. Kind of back to what I was saying about Maslow, about being lovable. I haven't quite figured out yet I have a few dear friends that are going through pretty bad pain right now, and they're hard to be around. And I'm a professional. It's hard. I don't know what to say to them. If any of you have any suggestions during Q&A, I'd love to hear it. I used to love it when my kids were little and they'd get sick because it was like my regular work duty would stop and I'd get to snuggle with them. But then I noticed after about 7 to 10 days, okay, my give a damn was busted. Well, I have a few friends that I'm at that spot with. Last off, I highly recommend when people join a support group. And I've had some people say they don't want to go to a support group because they think it's depressing to talk about, to be in a group of people with the same problem or similar problems. And boy, I can relate to that. The first support group I went to was held at the Ukiah Senior Center. And I pulled up and I thought, oh shit, I'm leaving. I was 39 years old and I thought I can't be already at the senior center. I already felt like my life was going downhill. And then I went in and it was fabulous. But, so sometimes it's a matter of finding the right support group. So once again, I didn't make this up, the biology, psychology, and social functioning. All three of these need to be optimal in order for us to thrive. And the problem with chronic pain is that by definition, there's like a hitch in each of our get-ups, in each of these areas. So you have to do everything in your power to try to support yourself in each of these areas so that you can still find meaning and you can still find some sense of purpose, of pleasure, and going back to Maslow, some way to be in the world besides letting the pain rule your life. Now, ironically, to wrap things up, and I thought this is maybe why Doreen invited me. October apparently is Prescription Medicine Abuse Month. Who knew? So, as part of my research, I found out that we have, as I said on the flyer, there are more people who have chronic pain than all of the other illnesses combined, and that in Mendocino County we have 2 deaths each month from prescription opioid abuse. And we have 120 people in the U.S. who die every day of medication abuse. So something that I wanted to let you all know, the Safe Prescription of Mendocino is giving out free lock boxes, and they look like this. And I had my teenager test it, which if a teenager can get through it. So if you have a teenager in the home, if you have a young person, if you have grandkids, if you even have friends, if you have housekeepers, you'd be surprised how quickly different medications develop feet and leave. So I brought one with some vitamins in there, but you literally zip it. My husband and I were joking because we could just figure I would lock it and then I wouldn't have my reading glasses, and I thought it was going to be a combination, and I thought, oh great, we're never going to be able to get that open. We're going to have to cut it open if I ever need any medication. Well, you probably could. When I interviewed the counselor at it's called the Arbor, make sure I get their name right. It's called the Arbor Youth Resource Center. She said, I'll pass this around. She said apparently there's huge statistics on drugs. Here, I said it was easy, and now I can't do it. Oh, there we go. Apparently, most addicts start as teenagers, and they start by getting access to the prescriptions that are in our medicine chests. And so her interview went something like this, that if you are aware of how many pills you have and how many pills you have left, she said that it's most, she was probably making generalities, but she said, they're not going to just take the whole bottle, but they're just going to skim a few off the top. And in my 20 years in home health and hospice, I have to say that was definitely what happened. It took someone counting to realize things were, something was wrong. So this was just more of a deterrent, and I guess I didn't try to cut it. I didn't want to ruin the bag. But when I had looked into these were similar to what gun safes, actually a little gun bag, because again, the idea is that if someone really wants to use your gun, they can, but the idea is just to make it a little bit less impulsive, keep the bullets separate from the weapon. So that's the same idea with this, is that it's pretty durable, but I'm sure you could use something to cut it open. But then they're going to know you've been in their pills, right? They have a grant. They have 100 of them right now. They've only given away 10, and they're getting more. So they really want the word to get out. And I said, well, have you given them to the pharmacies? And they said, yes. So apparently no one... I don't want to make this all just about opiates, because that's just one very small piece of the pie. But, they are obviously deadly in the wrong hands. So that's sort of the gist of my talk. I was hoping people might either have questions or have anecdotal information or positive things to share.
I missed the beginning, but it sounded like you said something about a doctor kind of talking about your pain and the psychological element of it in a way that was really off-putting. And
for sure.
I missed that story, but As a doctor, I know.
Myself, I could do that all day.
Well, just the part that about, like, as a doctor, sometimes I mean, I think that, you know, psychology plays a big part of any illness, and certainly, like you said, a big part of this illness.
Yes.
And so how does one bring that up in a way that is less off-putting?
Ooh, oh, that is such a good question. That is such a good question because I've thought about that and I own it as the patient in terms of not, I wasn't an advocate enough for myself to make it clear to that particular physician that, you know, that my pain was so severe, it was actually impairing my functioning. And then you're supposed to do that in 10 minutes, right? Right? Yeah, I mean, I have an hour with somebody, and it's hard for me to bring that up. Well, the great thing is that what I try to do first is normalize. And I think most of us can agree that if we are in a tense situation, our pain is going to be more heightened. What the particular physician said to me, and this was prior to, I think there was like 6 tumors in me, and one of them was the size of a football. So at that point, so that I was in that much pain, but apparently I didn't communicate that. So that's what I work with people now on, you know, making it easier for your doctor to help with that. First of all, the doctor can't help you with your social support, nor can he or she help you with your psychology, right? And nor can he or she help you with most of the things I threw out on the biology. And all of that stuff that's on us, right? And that's, I think, part of what I love about and why I agreed to talk tonight is because behind the Avenue to Wellness program is it's talking about how you really need to be your own advocate and be your own expert. Knowing that is, had I been more prepared for my appointments with keeping a track of my symptoms, what made it better or worse, etc., had I had more of my ducks in a row, I think I would have made it easier for that particular physician to been able to distinguish between psychological pain, though I don't know if anyone would ever present with that much pain. However, I think that, so your question again was how to bring that up in a way that doesn't minimize the person's experience of their pain.
Which I think you're kind of answering in a sense is that to, you know, talk about the physical part of it first and, you know,
Right.
kind of root that out and flesh that out. But then also I think sometimes, you know, it's good to at the end, like say, okay, but in terms of you dealing with this and functioning with this, you know, like what's the best way to, you know, say that without making it sound like you're making it up or whatever.
The other thing, we're trained as social workers to start where the patient is at. So if the patient is really experiencing pain, whether that's psychological, emotional, or physical, I would want to increase their support in that pain. So I would say something like, wow, I can tell you're really in a lot of pain. I don't think this particular medication is really going to help you because like I was saying with the biology and with the symptom cycle, like I got to the point where I didn't know what the side effects of the medications were, like what was causing what. By referring them to a program like the Healthier Living classes that the Avenue to the Wellness puts on, referring them to a therapist that does do like what I do, which is, you know, working with people in chronic pain specifically. And by approaching them, I think with that open heart and with a little bit of the not knowing. What was hard about my particular case is it wasn't like an open-ended thing, like you might have something, but I don't know what it is, so I think this. The more encouraging you are as the physician to encourage them to take care of themselves, and that includes, again, like I said, the traditional model that social workers use, which is the biology, the psychology, and their sociology, and how all three work together. again, you don't usually have that much time to have that long of a conversation with them. But most people, you don't have to convince most people that if they're sick in bed alone, do they feel better alone, sick, or do they feel better with someone they love beside them, holding their hand while they're watching TV, a funny movie they love? The pain is the same, but their experience of the pain becomes very different. I had a physician that I really respect say to me, she wanted me to separate my pain from my suffering. And I thought, oh, that's kind of that's another word for what we did when we were kind of teasing apart, how our biology, how our social functioning, and how the way we think about our biology and our social functioning all play into our experience of how we know pain. I also think that the more, this is just my opinion, there's no science behind this, but my own observations. The more you fix us, the more we're going to all start having more chronic pain because we're not dying of stuff early enough. So that's the other thing I say to myself when I start getting frustrated about pain. I think, well, I could have just went ahead and died. Or I remember my joking that if I were a cow, they would have put me out of my misery. So if I choose to live, I really want to live. I don't want to let the pain continue to define me or lead with that. I went back to work and I reinvented myself. I used to work for Adventist Health for 20 years, and now I'm in private practice so that I can control my hours. I know that, I don't make very much money, but I feel so good about myself going to work every day. The title of the talk was edited, and the reason I called it Beyond Pills, Potions, and Lotions was because those are the three things I tried until I finally understood what was going on. I tried pills. They didn't even touch the pain. I tried lotions. People up here make, salves with medicinal marijuana and stuff like that. But then I realized, I can't rub both legs in it. And one day, you can't walk around all sticky with smelly oils on you. And then I also did try the Chinese doctor of making potions. Your whole house smells and you get this little pile of bark and twigs and all kinds of strange looking stuff. So and I had to go beyond that because all of those things I was looking for something to fix me. And even though I've had, almost all of the disease removed from me, I still have some chronic stuff that's always going to be there. And now, to quote Maya Angelou, I wouldn't take anything from that journey because I'm such a better person than I was, 5 years ago when it was in full-blown, as much as I, pointed out all the ways I don't always feel like I'm a good worker or a good mother or a good partner or a good friend. But I know when someone has me, they have the real me now, and they don't have the fluff.
I got the AARP newsprint, littler magazine today, not the slick one, but the AARP newspaper. Yeah. Came today, and there's an article on about how your spouse or who you're living with may be causing your health or your not so health, causing pain, depending on personalities and stress between you and so I thought that was very interesting. I noticed that now my husband's gone, my blood pressure is a lot lower than it.
And I didn't think if I had bet you $100 before I got sick, whether or not my husband would have stuck around. I mean, he faints when he gets his finger pricked, like to find out what blood type he has. He would go to we'd visit his great aunt in the hospital, and he'd say, "So, isn't the weather beautiful today?" And I'd think, well, how the hell does she know? She's in the hospital bed. Like, I'd think, what's wrong with you that you don't know how to talk to sick people? But he has been fabulous. He used to get mad at our little kids when they'd get hurt. So it surprised me. But yes, I know that judging from my support group, that's not always the case. I'm in an online support group on Facebook that's up to like 15,000 members. And so, there's some obviously times where people, they're not in it for the long haul.
Thank you, Brenda.
Sure.
Thank you.